Previous speakers probably here have described hypersonic weapons, longer range cannon, future vertical lift helicopters, and how they're going to transform the Army. And that's an attractive vision, no doubt. But the reality is if the Army and the nation doesn't turn around the recruiting trends that they're experiencing today, those systems won't matter. They'll sit idle, unable to be employed for lack of soldiers. Recruiting shortfalls, which for far too long have been ignored, are now at the point where they pose an existential danger to U.S. national security. Good morning, thank you for that welcome. It's so glad to be here with you guys. As I came in this morning, I checked to make sure that on the 2000 year group, my name was still there, had not been borne off by some commandant with an alternative view of the world than mine, and it's still there, so that's a great thing. And congratulations to all of you, the War College students, on your impending graduation. What a great day, what a great weather and week to be moving on to your next chapter of what you're doing. I'm honored to have a chance to talk with you today. This is a crisis confronting not just the Army, but all the services. I can't speak to Army Secretary Christine Wormuth's other 5 priorities, but in my view, her 6th priority, which is to strategically adapt the way we recruit and retain talent into the Army in order to sustain the all-volunteer force, is both overdue and desperately needed. I've never served a day as a recruiter. I first became kind of seriously interested in military recruiting in 2018 when the Army missed its recruiting goals very publicly. And since then, my research leads me to conclude that every factor which plays into recruiting success is heading in the wrong direction. What's becoming clear to me, and hopefully to you, is that the year 2022 is the year where we seriously question whether the all-volunteer force can be sustained. A year ago, based on their models, the Army projected a requirement to recruit over 70,000 volunteers for the active force this year. Since then, they have been steadily revising those goals downward, first to 65,000, then to 60,000, and then a little over 53,000. Mind you, they're not revising the goals downward because they don't need those soldiers. They're revising the goals downward because they don't think they can recruit them. Now, it's only early June now. The Army is doubting they're going to make even those lowered numbers. And there's really no consolation in the Guard or the Reserve because they're not going to make their numbers either. Indeed, the Army recruiting enterprise as a whole will probably fall more than 20,000 soldiers short this year. To give you a sense of scale, there's about 5 million Americans that turn age 18 every year. 5 million. But when you take the number that are both qualified to serve and willing to serve, that number rapidly becomes in the hundreds of thousands. More on that later. As a result of this challenge, in its budget request for next year, 2023, the Army made the painful choice to cut the size of the Army by 12,000 soldiers, or about 4 brigade combat teams. And that's because they don't think they can recruit them. So the Army is going to be forced to shrink, even though Army Chief of Staff James McConville has testified that he believes the Army is too small to meet the National Defense Strategy. And lest you think this problem is confined to the Army, the Air, the Space Forces, the Navy, and to a degree the Marine Corps are all having recruiting challenges this year. The Navy has called 2022 arguably the most challenging year since the start of the all-volunteer force. But let's be clear, the Army's having the worst of it. And don't mistake this for some transitory thing that we're going to get through this, maybe 1 year or 2, and then we'll be fine, and this was just a thing we'll look back on. It's a long-term crisis I think the Army and the nation's going to have to deal with. So let's talk about the all-volunteer force and its success. Contrary to popular culture, conscription, the draft, has not been a traditional part of the U.S. history. America's only conscripted individuals for 35 of its 246-year history. In 1969, President Richard Nixon set up what's called the Gates Commission to study whether we needed to continue the draft, and the Gates Commission came back and recommended that the nation would be better served by an all-volunteer force. And so in January 1973, Nixon announced the end of the draft. And the quality of the force since, as measured by standardized tests like IQ scores, percentage of high school graduates, has really gone up. So it has been a positive thing for the U.S. military. And the all-volunteer force has generally met its recruiting goals. Before 2018, and I'll talk more about that, there were years when the services missed their objectives, the late 1990s, 2005, but these can be traced typically to one factor. And so in the late 1990s, the pay and the benefits were perceived to be not sufficient to attract people. And in 2005, the perception of high war casualties in Iraq generally kept people away. But the situation that the Army and the other services find themselves in today is much more complex. It's like being afflicted with 5 different unknown diseases, and the unfortunate doctor is trying to cure this patient without even knowing what the diseases are. So how does the Army recruit? Under Title 10 U.S. Code, recruiting is conducted by the individual services and the National Guard. The Office of the Secretary of Defense is above this, but they really don't have a role in recruiting. Army recruiting, headquartered at Fort Knox, Kentucky, is commanded by a major general. It's got 6 brigades, recruiting brigades underneath it, and 44 battalions, and underneath that, 1,400 recruiting stations. And you see them as you travel the nation in strip malls, usually very indistinguishable locations, but they're out there in our towns and cities. And these are staffed mostly with mid-grade non-commissioned officers, men and women in their age 30s and sometimes early 40s, locate, in and amongst American towns and cities. Army recruiting is driven by goals, and I know there's probably some analytic folks in here, ORSAs we call them in the Army, Operations Research Systems Analysis people. They run their models, they tell the Army how many people they need to recruit the next year. Those goals are published, given to Army Recruiting Command. They go down, just like everything goes downhill in the Army, they go down till they actually get all the way down to an individual recruiter. And a typical quota for an individual recruiter is maybe to put 3 to 5 volunteers in the Army each month. Army recruiting has typically operated below the radar screen, and that is until 2018. Despite putting over $200 million in enlistment bonuses, the money we pay volunteers to sign up, the Army very publicly failed to meet its recruiting goal that year, 76,500, falling short by over 6,000 soldiers. And that, frankly, was a major shock to the Army. Based on that failure, the Army initiated several new programs. They had one called the 22 Cities effort, where they went to cities which had heretofore kind of been considered hopeless for recruiting. And I'm talking about places like Denver and Chicago and Los Angeles, places where very few recruits entered the Army. So they made a determined effort to recruit there. They set up an Army Enterprise Marketing Office in partnership with a major marketing firm in Chicago. They stood up an esports team. These are video gamers, if you will, a warrior fitness team, and they tried to do more effective social media outreach. And then in 2020 and 2021, they had to shift their model completely to virtual recruiting with the pandemic, and they actually did not do very poorly in that endeavor. Maybe there wasn't anything else going on, but they essentially did pretty well those years. This year, when the dimensions of the 2022 program became known, they launched Army Service Week. They've offered enlistment bonuses of up to $50,000, which is unprecedented for the Army. And they've also offered 2-year enlistment tours. Normally it's 3 to 4. 2-year is not something that's in the best interest of the Army, because by the time you get somebody fully trained, it's almost about time for them to leave. But they're frankly trying to think of every idea to get people in the Army. As a matter of fact, the Army just launched last week Know Your Army campaign. It's a campaign directly trying to make American youth more familiar with benefits and the compensation and all the other packages that the Army offers. The sum total of all these efforts has been positive. They have done better, but nevertheless, the outlook for 2022 remains very bleak. So why is this? What is driving all this? In the movie The Perfect Storm, you had 2 very powerful weather fronts combining with a hurricane, and they formed the perfect storm of 1991. In the case of recruiting in 2020 and 22, I think 5 factors are combining to create this crisis, none of which trending in the right direction. So these are, in no particular order, demographics. Number of U.S. citizens in the age bracket 20 to 24 is stagnant, and it's projected to remain that way as far out as the U.S. Census Bureau can see, at least 2050. It's about 31 million people in that thing, and it just continues through all the years. The main driver of that demographic actually shifts to immigration in the year 2030 from U.S. live births. So we're going to see a different feeder for that population. I guess you could say the United States is relatively lucky because there are many other countries are actually in that age bracket shrinking. And so South Korea, for example, they face a decline of about half of their potential pool of draftees in the next 2 decades. And so they're having to adjust how they man and their army to meet this declining population. So that demographic in the United States does not grow, but at least I guess it does not shrink. The second factor that's impacting this recruiting problem is the declining ability of U.S. youth to qualify for the military. The percentage of youth able to qualify continues to decline. In 2016, that number was 29%, i.e. 29% of American youth can qualify to be in the military without a waiver. Now, today, that number is 23%, or less than 1/4 of American youth can qualify to be in the military. And if you're not shocked by that number, you ought to be. So what is disqualifying American youth? Perhaps the biggest one is obesity. 19% of adults 18 to 24 are obese. And obviously obese is a category past overweight and into the next category of body mass. Mental health, you've probably all heard or seen in this phenomena where this number is exploding among our youth. 26% of our youth age 18 to 25 have experienced some sort of mental health issue which required them to see a professional. And it's interesting, as I bore into this, the military just brought online a new system, prescription visibility drug system, which they use at the entrance processing stations where they can pull up a volunteer's prescription drug history. And you would think, well, that's all for the good, right? The dilemma is this new system is disqualifying many more people than previously got through. And you could say, well, that was a flaw in our system. We should have known about these things. But nevertheless, it is pushing down recruiting numbers. And the biggest drug that they're seeing is probably very obviously psychotropic drugs prescribed for our youth. And that's not an automatic disqualifier, but if you've used it relatively recently, it is a disqualifier. A poor vision, a big disqualifier. Here's one that you probably could have anticipated, but not. COVID vaccine reluctance. 16 to 28-year-olds of that age bracket, 33% have not gotten the COVID vaccine and don't plan to. And so when you go to the recruiter's office, they make it clear to you that this is a thing, and we lose some people because of that. And then there's other lesser factors, lack of a high school degree, some sort of physical ailment, serious crime record. Significantly, 44% of the people that come try and volunteer have more than one disqualifying factor. So they're obese and they have a mental health issue or something like that. So that was the second factor. The third factor, and this should come of no surprise to y'all, is the strong labor market. Unemployment is going down. It was 3.6% in May. That's going down faster than economists thought it would. And this strong unemployment number is creating a lot of competition for labor. Amazon offering pay in excess of $18 an hour. You get health care on day one. You get paid vacation. You get educational benefits. I was coming home last night, and there's a District Taco where I live, and they had a big sign up saying, pay $16 an hour plus tips. And that should be a wake-up call to all of us. And so when you do the calculations, and I did, what we pay a Army private E1 is not $18 an hour. And that's for 40 hours. If you figure out what an Army private actually works in terms of hours, they're not making anywhere near $18 an hour. So the fourth factor is the willingness, and the military calls that propensity to serve. In the aggregate, when you bring males and females together, only about 10% of them say they are likely or probably likely to serve in the military. And that number's going down. So what's causing that drop in propensity? There's not a lot of data on that, and that in itself, I think, is a problem. What I have discerned is that I think 6 factors. One of them is the percentage of veterans in our society is going down every year. So it goes down 1.7% every year that goes by, and unless we have another World War II or something like that, God forbid, it's going to keep going down, so the number of veterans continues to go down. And veterans are a major influencer in youth deciding to serve. Second one of these is that every year a greater percentage of youth go to college, directly to college from high school. It was in the 40s, now it went to the 50s, and today that number stands at 63% of high school seniors go directly to college. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it hurts Army recruiting efforts. One of the enablers of that is there is a ton of money for college, either grants or loans floating around, so that nobody says, I can't go to college for lack of money. And again, as you know, that used to be a big selling point of the Army and the military was join the military, get money for college. And then 3, many have written, I'm not an expert on this, on the broadening civil-military gap. And I think you probably had an expert on that, Dr. Parks or Brooks. Yeah, anyhow, this gap between the civilians and the military continues to grow. 50% of youth admit they have little or no knowledge of the military. A recent Army survey found out that of Generation Z, which is the key generation, only 51% of them think the Army allows time for recreation and hobbies. And I remember talking to young people where I work about military careers, and they said, yeah, but I'd really like to have a dog. And I hear the Army doesn't let you have a dog. I was like, no, we actually are people. You know, we do allow dogs, even cats. I'm not a cat person, but we'll allow you to have a cat too. And then number 4, I think there's some counter messaging going on. This is going to be a delicate subject, but there are commercials you will watch on TV which will show you wounded veterans, and they will ask you for money to help support these veterans who have been wounded in the service of their country. And I remember watching one of these commercials with my mom and dad, and I think my mom turns to me and says, I don't understand, why doesn't the government take care of these people? Why do they have to depend on charity to get, you know, a house or a caregiver or something like that? And so those commercials, I don't think persuade many young people to join the military if they see a disabled veteran and they're on having to take charity. There is reason to believe that today's youth desire a different work-life balance than previous generations do, and the military is perceived as not supportive of that. And then the 6th, and maybe the most sensitive factor, I believe, is dragging down propensity, is a decline in America's trust and confidence in the military. As you may know, the military has been the #1 institution which Americans trust. Now small business is #1, the military is #2. We're still very high up there. I don't want to give you that impression, but the percentage of Americans who say they have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in the military has gone down to 69%. 10 years ago, that number was 78%. So why is that? Why is that number going down? There's not much data. I know the Afghanistan withdrawal shocked a lot of people. And there is a perception that the military is becoming politicized. And so depending on which political side of the aisle you sit on, you could see the military is increasingly viewed as a racist, extremist breeding ground or a woke, fragile social experiment force. And that we can say, well, that's not right, but I will just tell you, that's happening. And they get that from their parents, and they get that from their friends and everybody. I should also note there is just an overall decline by Americans in all institutions. And so by and large, Americans are becoming more and more skeptical and cynical of our American institutions. So those are the 6 reasons. I know I spent a lot of time on that. Those are the 6 reasons I think propensity is going down. Finishing off of these reasons why I think recruiting is in trouble. The 5th reason is I don't believe recruiting is meeting their goals because they're not employing cutting-edge techniques, technology, and messaging to attract youth. And it's not a slam against the recruiters or the recruiting leaders, but recruiting people tell me that they have Somewhat primitive information technology. They're still working in a Microsoft Office environment where today's youth are working not on that. They're not working in email and PowerPoint slides and Excel spreadsheets. They've moved on to something different. Especially in the case of the Army, there's a branding problem. And we have talked about this, but what is the Army's brand? Is it patriotism and service? Is it pay and benefits? Is it steady work? The Army has kind of oscillated between all these various things. Maybe you can discuss that back in your seminar. I know the Army could use your help on that. I think there's a talent management issue in Army recruiting. It's worth asking whether the Army is assigning at least some portion of its best and brightest to recruiting duty. Other services do this better than the Army does. I did a look. We have six Army recruiting brigades. Only 5 of those brigade commanders had ever served a day in recruiting before they took command of that brigade. So they were brand new to recruiting, coming in at the brigade commander level. And I think that probably the same phenomenon exists. I didn't go down to all the battalions, and it certainly exists at the commanding general level of Army recruiting. And most of the former commanding generals of Army recruiting have never served a day in recruiting. And I know we have business leaders out there. You can think to yourself, well, what kind of results would we expect if we took a bunch of newbies and just shoved them into recruiting for a 2-year or 3-year tour and said, hey, recruit. I know you haven't done this before, but how hard can this be? But that's essentially what we're doing. So to wrap this up, what are some solutions? I know at least some of you are thinking, well, we should bring back the draft. That's about where we're at. And on some days when this is at its darkest, I think the same thing. One, I think that's politically untenable. It would be like cutting Social Security. I think nobody would touch bringing back the draft. So it's really not a politically, there's this test that they give you strategists here that says it has to be feasible and suitable and something else and something else. This one is not. This fails that test, and so we couldn't do that. But even, let's say it did, we wouldn't like the results we got. We would not like the quality we get. We would not like the churn that we get. You can't keep a conscript in your military for more than a couple years. And again, this problem of people constantly going, it would be like the entire Army is on a short tour somewhere, and we would not like the results we get. So we're not going to bring back the draft. But I do think we need to better connect American youth to the military. We need to build a better understanding. There is a good story to be told, I think. My son was in the military, got out after 5 years, but he came away a stronger person, a better leader. And even though he had been out of the corporate world for 5 years while his peers were moving forward, when he got out of the military, he jumped in front of them because they could see he had leadership and he knew what was going on. We need to better integrate the Army into communities. In the olden days, Army units, there was no Army recruiting, and units had to go out and find their own people to fill their units. The 7th Cavalry comes to mind. They detached officers to go back to the big cities like Chicago, and I don't know what tactics they used, maybe a bag of money or a bottle of booze or whatever they did, but they got people into their unit, and we need more of that. This should not just be a Army recruiter kind of thing. Somehow we need to get the 82nd Airborne into our cities in a good way. We need the engagement of national leaders. We see people like, for me, General Dunford comes to mind. He is like a epitome of me to a military officer. And yet when he retired, he went and he's on his porch somewhere in Massachusetts, something like that. Why didn't we put him on contract for 2 years to go talk to high school students around the country talking about what he got from the military and what it can do for them? I think we miss a lot of opportunities like that. Army Secretary Wormuth has formed what she calls an Army recruiting tiger team to study this problem. She's doing that, I think, probably for all of her objectives, and that's a good thought. Unfortunately, most of the problems I described with Army recruiting don't lie within the control of the Army. These are societal things. These are big government things. These are legislative things which an Army task force can't touch. And and probably a Pentagon task force can't even touch it. And so we need a lot more engagement on these topics from Congress, from national leaders, corporate executives who deal in recruiting every day, trying to fill up their workforce. And how do they solve these problems? Is there a law change that could be made? I don't know. I will tell you, high schools, many high schools, American high schools, do not allow a military recruiter on their physical footprint. They're just not allowed. And you will find a whole body of literature that says having Army recruiters in a high school is predatory. It lends itself to youth being enlisted in the military and violations of, I forget, there's UN prescriptions against, having children in your military. We need to give our youth more credit. I mean, they are thinking about college and what college they want to go to much earlier than the senior year of high school. They've already kind of gelled in by then, and the military needs to get ahead of that. I remember I talked about disqualification, how so many youth don't disqualify. We need to work that from both sides, both the youth side and the standard side. And so I think there's a role the military can play in that. We can get perhaps recruiters or veterans even into high schools, help the PE teachers before these high school seniors become obese and unfit. Maybe there's some intervention that can be done sooner than that in order to get them more qualified when that point of decision comes. And then we also need to look at the standards. Do they all make sense? I have been a party of institutions where we're not going to compromise on the standard. By gosh, they either meet the standard or they walk. We need to be prepared to look very carefully at the standards we have. And I'll enter into a controversial topic here of marijuana. Some number of states, 18, 19, 20, District of Columbia, have legalized marijuana. But from the federal perspective, it's not. And if you come into the recruiting station and test positive for THC, I think it is, that's a no-go. And so we have this. So if you're the recruiter in Colorado where, marijuana is the law of the land and the recruiter doesn't allow you in if you smoke marijuana, there's a conflict there. And guess who's bearing the brunt of that conflict? Some poor staff sergeant who's at the crux between federal and state policy. We need to figure out what young people value. This is another way to fix this thing. Just like there's an old saying that you can't kill your way out of an insurgency, the Army's not going to be able to buy its way out of this recruiting crisis. I don't care what we make the recruiting bonuses, the enlistment bonuses. I don't think money is the thing. It's something else. But that is the traditional solution of the Army. Well, let's just up the bonuses. Let's up the something or another. That's not going to work in this case. Maybe there's the military gets a lot of people who tried college and it didn't work, and they leave after a year or two and they have some form of debt. Maybe the military could forgive that debt. Maybe that would be attractive. I don't know. We just need to think very broadly about this. And then finally, a final category of things they could do, they should look at improving recruiting outcomes. And so many of you are probably aware the military has this program called Junior ROTC. There are 3,000 such junior ROTC programs across the United States. These are high school programs run by former military veterans. It's perceived in many cases as kind of it's a program to build citizenship and character development. There are 30,000 high schools, and so the junior ROTC programs are covering about 10% of the high schools. About 1,700 of those programs are Army ROTC. In my view, from what I've looked at, we don't use those programs effectively at all. And Congress has said you can use those programs to make young people aware of opportunities in the military, but we shy away from that. That makes us nervous. I will tell you, we could do a much better job. The uniforms that people wear in these junior ROTC programs, frankly, are ridiculous. They're scaled down versions of military uniforms, which look fairly goofy on 16-year-olds. The word JROTC, what does that even mean to a young person anyhow? Why would you join something that you don't even understand what the acronym is? But they do anyhow. But we could do so much better. This could be so much of a cooler program if we gave kids, instead of a scaled down military uniform, maybe a neat polo shirt to wear or something like that, and the other kids in the school are going, I want one of those shirts, that is so cool. It's Under Armour, or something like that. I'm just speaking off the top of my head here. We need to weight the main effort. There are some areas of the country where it's more productive to recruit than others. We need to pile into those places and make these targets. There is a school of thought in the Army that the Army should be representative of America. And in principle, I agree with that idea. So, when you look at the ethnic and geographic breakdown, minority breakdown of America, theoretically, the idea is that should be reflected in the Army. And that is a goal. But if you are not meeting your numerical goals, I think it's a right question to ask, is that where we should be, or should we be piling into those areas where we have the most prospects to recruit? Something for you to talk about in seminar. I have had multiple arguments about this. I mean, there is one school of thought that says, yeah, we're not getting any recruits from Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont, right? But that's because we're bad recruiters. If we just went into Vermont in a different way, well, by gosh, they would sign up. And so I don't have any data on that. I'm skeptical of that idea, though, however, and I don't know why that is. Do Army recruiters present the best possible image? Are they exactly how we want America to see our recruiters? I'm not convinced of that. And then finally, this idea of getting our recruiters the best information technology, the tablets, the social media training. Somebody sends a tweet to them and they're right back at them, that kind of thing. I'm not convinced we're doing the right thing by those folks. So that's kind of it. I'm getting ready to conclude here. I look forward to your questions and comments. I'll just end with saying this is not a transitory problem. That's the way the Army and the military service have viewed recruiting. If we can just get through 2022, we will figure out 2023. We know we're on the cusp of something that's going to be a long, barren stretch of military recruiting, I believe. And the best military weapons that we can build and everything like that are going to be of no use if we don't have the soldiers to man them. This problem has arrived. It's here. The question is, what's America going to do about it? And I'm convinced we can all play a role in this solution, and I invite you to help the Army and the military services work this problem. So thank you very much. Yes, sir, right up in the front. Excuse me.
So thank you very much. That was scary and enlightening. So at the risk of being insensitive and perhaps, insensitive, I think that the elephant in the room is the colleges. You mentioned that 60% of our high school graduates go to college. And whether you like it or not, whether you agree with it or not, and I'm not here to make a judgment on that. But it is very clear that the atmosphere, the teachers on most college campuses, and this is according to polls, more informed people than I, the concepts of love of country, patriotism, service have become viewed as jingoistic, right-wing, etc. And so long as the youth, who might be the best recruits, are exposed to downplaying or even muddying the character of people who might want to enlist in the Army, we're not going anywhere. And this is not just in colleges, but it is most prominent in colleges where most of the figures of authority and respect have these views. How do we fix this? And I have no clue.
Yeah, that's a great question. I have an intern that's working for me right now. He's at Harvard, and he's in Navy ROTC, and he asked me the other day, he said, "Hey, sir, how should I respond to these comments from professors expressing hostility to me when I'm wearing my uniform?" And I would say, well, with shock and dismay is how you should respond, because here this guy is in Navy ROTC, and professors are giving him a hard time about wearing his uniform on the campus. I think you're right. What do we call that? The academia is relatively unsupportive in many cases, except there are some exceptions, but we have to get them earlier than that before they get to college, frankly. Their families have to play a role, their uncles, their grandpas, their grandmas, their aunts. They all have to kind of play a role and reach out. And so that by the time they get to college, they are kind of been immunized against this ideology that support to the military is somehow crazy or misplaced or something like that. I wish I had a better answer for you, but that's what I got. Let's go all the way to the back. Yes, ma'am. You with that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. So as you were speaking, I was just wondering, is this just a US problem or are other countries experiencing the same issue?
Excellent question. So it's really a cross. I would say it's not just even the West. Mostly, I guess I would say it's democracies. And so Taiwan, if you were to look at Taiwan's military, they are really hurting. They rely on a conscription model, but because of popular opinion, they had to scale it back so that you only serve, I want to say 3 or 4 months, and that's not working for them. The military is untrained on that model, and so they're having to look at extending. But Sweden had to go back to the draft because they couldn't attract enough volunteers. Norway already drafts conscripts people. It's more popular in those countries. I talked to officials from those countries. I said, how do you make this work? And they say, well, we recognize it as an obligation of citizenship. And somehow we moved past that idea. And Israel, the most prominent example, everybody serves in the IDF. And it's kind of like accepted. And all countries are grappling with this. We have at least the advantage of our demographic is not shrinking, so that we have the raw material at least to feed into this engine, if you will. And so now it's just a question of how do we influence those folks, I think. Yes, please, ma'am, right there.
I'm curious as to your view on the qualification testing, particularly the academic testing that's used. I think many of us who are in education would find those tests to contain both explicit and implicit bias. And so I'm wondering if changing some of the testing and qualifications, forgetting for a moment that the cut score is already low, maybe something's wrong with the test.
So you've hit an area I'm not an expert on. I might even consider myself a journeyman apprentice in that area. But the military doesn't lose a terribly high percentage to what's called the ASVAB test. And so even if we were to make that easier or even to throw it away, I don't know that we would solve this disqualification problem. Your point is well taken, but I just don't know who has looked at these qualification tests in terms of a view towards bias.
Well, they deter some people even from entering the process.
Yeah.
So it isn't just that people don't make the cut score. It's that people believe they can't pass the test, so they don't even enter the process to become recruit.
Yeah, I think that's a problem. One of my recommendations in the things I've written is that I think by law, every high school student should take these qualification tests by law. That doesn't incur any obligation. And some of these tests are very helpful to tell young people what they're good at and what they're not so good at. And so I think there's value in that. Again, that has proven very scary to some parts, and so I don't know that that'll ever get through Congress. Yes, sir, in the red shirt right there.
Sir, Colonel Dan Mitchell. I served as a recruiting commander from 2017 to 2019 in North Carolina, and I can tell everybody, recruiters are fantastic. It was a job I went to thinking this is going to be terrible. But recruiters are out there every day trying to change the lives of American people. And they are Americans, and they live in your communities. And they are doing their level best to fill out the Army. We say we have an all-volunteer force. We have an all-recruited force. And it's the recruiters that are reaching out. So I just want to take an opportunity to reach out to all of you who are visiting from around the country and implore you and challenge you to go find the recruiting station near you. because you probably have one within a 20-minute drive of you, and go and sit down and talk to the recruiters and ask them what help they need. If you've been impressed by what's going on here this week and the people you've talked to and talking about all of these challenges that the world is facing and that we need a military for, please go talk to a recruiter, ask them what help they need. I guarantee it's going to be something like referrals or getting access to schools. We just appreciate your interest and having those opportunities to get out there and talk to young kids, because it is a math problem, as you said, sir. We have a decreasing number of people who have experience with the military, and 74% of the people who sign up have a personal connection to the military. So we have to find a way to overcome that. And your advocacy is critical for that. So you have a couple of successful recruiting, 2, 3, 4 successful recruiting commanders in this audience that know what this is about. We'd love to talk to you at some point if you're interested, maybe connect afterwards or something. But you come out of this job passionate because you get to really see the quality of the Army and the quality of the American people. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And yeah. Yeah, Dr. Metz has my contact info, and I would love to jump on a call with you guys and talk. Yes, sir, right there.
Some 50 years ago, when I was graduating high school, we had career days, and there were Army, Navy, Marines recruiters there. And I'm wondering where the impetus to not have the representation came from, whether it was school district or state or local. If you could address that. Thank you.
And maybe one of the former recruiter commands could better than I, but it varies among district, state, the support. Some school districts embrace the military, and the guidance counselors will say, you can do this or you can do and they'll give you the choice of the military, and then the next school district over will be completely the opposite. And so maybe that's a benefit of our republic and our system of government. There is no consistency among school districts, even among states or anything like that in terms of their support of the military. I mean, the school district in Fayetteville, North Carolina, kills it. They produce more recruits there than some states do by multiples, and so it's really kind of varies on their support. I wish I had a better answer for you. Yes, sir.
Is anyone thinking about broadening the idea of national service? I think when it comes to thinking about a draft, if national service was expanded to include National Park Service, USAID, teaching in schools, I think it would be much more appealing, and you could make that argument that all the arguments of patriotism and contribution to the culture, and I think it would benefit then the military too.
Yeah, I agree with you. And you can look this up. There was a Congress chartered a commission on national public, military, and some other kind of service 2 years ago, and they made a very wonderful report about how public service has kind of been downplayed in America. There is a math problem here. I mentioned how 31 million Americans turn 18 every year. The federal government, even states, can't absorb 31 million volunteers coming to their door and saying, I'm here for my public service. It'd be kind of pandemonium. But I think we could do a better job of making public service a virtue. And when was the last time, think back, you heard a national figure talk about the virtue of public service, serving your country, and this has been a thing for America in past years, but it's not today. So I'm all in favor of public service. We can't absorb all the youth, but we could make it easier, I think. And there is a problem of people just don't even know. They don't understand. So again, if you're in Fayetteville, you know everything about the military. But if you're in Minneapolis, you know almost nothing about the military. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, we talked about this in our group in terms of public service and how instead of not having a draft, but coming up with some creative solution in terms of part-time or voluntary, this kind of thing. But what I want, there's a couple things I wanted to ask you, but I also wanted to mention one of the things we talked about. I'm here with another colleague from the Board of Trustees of Penn State, right? She's the vice chair of academic affairs. I'm the chair of the outreach, community development. And so much to me, we have never even had a presentation by ROTC, which I think our vice chair is now going to do. But I think we need, because and that's why I agree with the gentleman over there who said, I think all of us can become very involved in this, because I'm very invested in this recruiting aspect after this experience, because it's been fantastic. And it is a problem, I think, that those of us who don't have military connections, I'm in New York City, we don't have this exposure. But there's many ways around it. But back to Penn State, what we can do so much is, for instance, we have $1 billion in research. We have a lot of defense contracts, and we are big in climate change. And that has been identified as a major threat to national security by the military in all branches, and for quite some time. It is not a far stretch to say, let's reframe this. Climate change at Penn State, national security. That's where you bring in opportunities to talk about the military, and not in the narrow terms. So I think there are opportunities there, and it has to do with, and I'm wondering what has been done in terms of formal outreach and a systematic approach to, corporations, private sector, who can get invested in this and understand the importance, like even the social media companies who can really help. And university, there's so much that can be done at a top level to reframe this issue. It's not just about military service. It's about much bigger social issues and public service. So I'm just wondering about, and also I have to say one thing, in terms of, we get a lot of federal funding, and there's always strings attached. Why can't we do that all over the place and say, you get this money if you, and it would have to be handled in a much different way, but making the introductions in terms of military national security. So, there's a lot of things that can be done here, I think.
Good points, ma'am. To your question about corporate outreach, things like that, I think that's kind of haphazard, frankly. And the Army headquarters, Army recruiting doesn't have a lot of bandwidth for those type of connections. They're a head down, let's try and recruit as many as we can today kind of thing. One of the things I have found in my research is that, again, love Army recruiting, but they take a head down, we got to accomplish the 2022 mission. Otherwise, we get our heads chopped off by our bosses. And so the problem, the longer term problems that Army recruiting has, corporate outreach, things like that, that's not a thing where the Army has the bandwidth or to put a lot, plant a lot of seed corn. They're more in a, gosh, we got to get this mission done kind of thing. And that might be good for a transitory problem where the storm is going to pass over, but that's not the situation we're in, I think, anymore. Yes, sir, up here.
Thank you very much. I spent most of my life in Chicago, and there, the famous Marshall Field store, Marshall Field used to say, give the customer what he wants or she wants. And that's a lead up to my feeling that it's important for the Army to recognize the degree to which the populace generally is undereducated about what it is to be an American and what our culture is about in terms of respect for law and respect for the individual and the rights. And as a result of that, we've got this problem, and it's going to stick around. So speaking as someone who once had a teenage son who was recruited, and the Marines almost got him. But I pointed out to him that it was different to be a grunt than it was to be an officer. So he decided to go to college, and now he's a very successful man in education. But here's my point. What kids are looking for is a role model. They have lost their way before they even get started. And if the Army can find a way, the gentlemen and women in this room, people like the people I've met who are in the military in this seminar, are such excellent people that can somehow get to both the recruit for the average, 2-year job or whatever, as well as the future officer, a role model. You have to what they can be in front of them, and they will be attracted to it.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's this thing about put somebody in an Army uniform in a high school with their ribbons and all those kinds of things and talk about what it did for them. You know, I remember my son was on the big, you know, you might have children that did this, the big college tour, and he hadn't really thought about ROTC, but somehow he had an engagement with the professor of military science at the University of Richmond, and he was sold. You know, he didn't even have to look at the pizza bar at the cafeteria, you know, but it was this, just this one guy had such an impression on my son that he came back and said, I'm gonna do ROTC at the University of Richmond. I really like this guy. Now that guy moved on after a year, but it doesn't matter. That's what got him in the door, you know, and we have a great, when I say we have a great story to tell, it's our people. That's our story that we have to tell. But the trouble is they're locked up on, you know, at Fort Hood and Fort Bragg and all these other places where people don't see them and the story doesn't get out. And so I couldn't agree with you more. Yes, sir, right there. Yes, please.
So this one's deeply personal to me. I'm a father of 6 children. I absolutely believe, like the previous question, comment, that the solution to your problem is in this room, 100%. You know, I just wanted to list here a couple of people that have made that for my children, for my son specifically, who a lot of you have met this week. First was his 6th grade history teacher in Texas history, who was an Air Force intelligence officer and took the time in class to explain what that meant. The next was an 89-year-old veteran, who's an airman that took the time to introduce Chris to Civil Air Patrol. Next were the leaders in his Civil Air Patrol unit, who every week took the time to teach respect for the flag, for the country, to understand. I mean, it's his first introduction to chain of command, first introduction to a lot of like social situations that were not natural for him as a, you know, feral child running around our house. And it forced the dialogues that I wouldn't have forced as a father, as somebody that's never worn the uniform. And the next was a major at Spangdahlem, who, when I came out to do an innovation project, he actually proactively said, hey, do you want to bring one of your kids along? They can stay at our house. The next is a buddy of mine, Joe, who's a retired Special Forces team guy. And we went to a conference, and Chris came along, and I watched this guy who had broken more doors than I can imagine walk side by side with my son. And when my son said, hey, what can I do to be great? Looked at him and said, lose weight. And guess what? They had a candid discussion, honest discussion about it. And over the last 2 months, my son's lost 15 pounds. He's been like militant about it. And last night, you know, we went to Applebee's and I ordered a sweet tea, and he looked at me with like an eye of disgust. And to bring it to here, the National Security Seminar enabled me to bring my son with me. Dave Hazelton, who's also father of 2 boys, took a specific interest in my son. Took the time to talk to my son. Commandant took time not only to meet with me, but with my son. His wife took a lot of time to talk in the entrance there to the house about the charter that's on the wall and explain the historical significance of that to my son. I really think you need all of those contexts before someone even walks in the door at that recruiting center. And so while I wasn't trying to give a diatribe to you to say this, the question becomes that I have, what can we do to facilitate and make it natural for veterans as well as active duty members to be free to open their doors to the youth?
A great question, and I love your story. And one of the things we could do is on the way out of the military, you know, the military does a great job of giving you your I'm a soldier for life pin and all, and telling you about your benefits. They say nothing about any kind of request they might have for you to go back to your communities and bring more people into the military. And they give you no tools for that. They give you nothing about that. And that could change, and I think that should change. Now, some people just intuitively do that, like the people you talked about, but I think we could make that more implicit, kind of a thing like you were a soldier, you're still a soldier, you need to keep helping us get military folks in the military. And just making that ask, I think, is something. Yeah, I don't have any other good ideas. Yes, ma'am, right there.
Hi, Colonel Katrina Walters. You spoke about the need to reevaluate our standards, and you spoke specifically about mental health. But I know from AIT, one of the top reasons for separation is behavioral health disorders. And obviously, the Army is struggling with the suicide problem. So what are your suggestions to mitigate that risk?
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's a hard one. You know, you mess with that at your own peril. You know, if somebody's had a history of severe anxiety or depression or things like that, at what point can you say that's no longer who they are? Because if it's gonna remanifest itself, it's gonna manifest itself in basic training or AIT, or even on the battlefield, and you don't want that. So that's a very fine line between making a judgment call, and I don't even know if we're qualified to make that. I'll give you an example of a standard, though, that we should look at. I remember I was at Fort Leonard Wood. I commanded 3rd Chemical Brigade there, and underneath that brigade, we had 3 battalions of basic training. And every day, as the brigade commander, I would get big, thick packages of separation soldiers that are in basic training for something that had cropped up, and now they were no longer medically qualified to stay in the service. And it was a lot of different things, but a lot of them were asthma. And, you know, and I was like, where is all this asthma coming from? And so this one soldier, Private Yox, her big package came to my desk one day, and it said, you know, she's got asthma or exercise-induced asthma and no longer qualified for service. But also on top of the package were like yellow stickies or notes from the drill sergeant saying, boy, Private Yox has really got a lot of heart, and she really is a good soldier. And if there's any way we could keep her, could we? And hopefully the story has some relevance. But anyhow, so I said, okay, tomorrow send Private Yox up to brigade and let's go for a run. And so Private Yox and I ran all over Fort Leonard Wood, which is one thing Fort Leonard Wood has is places to run. And we ran all over for probably like 6 miles. And Private Yox hung with me the entire time, and we ran faster than the other formations. So Private Yox and I went back to the brigade headquarters, and we ripped up this whole big thick package of separation paperwork, and I shook her hand and said, welcome to the Army, or welcome back to the Army, because she was being told to pack her stuff. Today, Private Yox is Chief Warrant Officer Yox, and so she's a successful Army leader. And so at some of these standards, I just don't know, I think we're almost inclined too quickly to process people out, and we need to think about the Court of Appeals or things like that. And there's probably other things like that. I get this from recruiters that say, hey, the standards are really strict, and then 2, if we want to get a waiver, it takes forever. We got to go up to like some super high level in the Pentagon to get this waiver, and by that time, you know, time has a value of itself. If this waiver took 4 months to come back from the Pentagon, that person found something else better to do in those 4 weeks. You know, they went right to the next cubicle and signed up with the Navy or something like that. So we have to. No, that's a bad thing. But but yeah, so the waiver process, I hear it from recruiters all the time that our waiver process for these standards we have takes too long. Next question. Yes, ma'am, right there.
Hi, good morning, Melissa. I'm from Seminar 16. Along the same lines, I'm in a disability attorney and I'm in local government in the great state of Texas. And we spend a lot of time, money, and effort on destigmatizing mental health. We're using a lot of our ARPA money specifically for that. So we hear a lot from young people who say they don't want to seek help because they want to join the military. So can you expand a little more on the mental health requirement?
Not really. I can. So there is and maybe some of the recruiters in here can help me a little bit on this, but you have to have not been on some of these fairly strong psychotropic drugs for some period of time before your enlistment. So if you were 13 and you saw somebody for an issue and they prescribed something, and now you're 18, that's not going to be a big problem. If you saw somebody last week and you're still on that particular prescription, that is a problem. And so I don't know, any recruiters in here want to take a better stab at that answer? Because that's what I
Sorry, sir. So I was the USAREC waiver surgeon
Yeah.
in
See,
a
there we
prior
go.
job. So
Yeah.
So yes, it's actually 36 months on medications, or if you've had symptoms or required treatment within the last 12 months, you require a waiver.
Yeah.
And then there's certain disqualifications if you've been hospitalized previously for suicide, or if you have some more severe psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, those are disqualifying.
Thank you so much.
Just to quickly add to that, I think a lot of it, you've mentioned it, people don't know really what they don't know, right? So a lot of it is education. And in regards to the question about school districts, I know in my community, it's a lot of school districts don't allow it, even in Texas, surprisingly. But it's not driven so much by the school districts as the parents.
Yeah.
And again, they don't know what they don't know. It's a lot about education.
Yeah, so when you say that, they're not allowing the recruiters in the high school kind of thing?
Correct.
Yeah, yeah, that makes no sense to me. Yes, sir, right in the back there.
Hey, sir, Rick Sheff, Seminar 11, on faculty here. Two questions, and I want to kind of bring it up to the strategic level of what might be being done inside the Beltway. First question is, a few years ago we visited the Department of Education, and there appeared to be zero link between DOD and DOE, or Department of Ed. And kind of going back to a question that was asked before, is there any work being done between DOD and Department of Education to incentivize or come up with incentive programs top down, especially when you talk about the dollars? Second question is when it comes to the hourly wage, which you sort of did the math on for us. How receptive has Congress been to really kicking in and improving the pay and benefits to more appropriately reflect the work that's being done?
Great question. So I don't have perfect knowledge. I'm unaware of any linkage between even the Army and any other federal department in terms of this recruiting problem. And again, there's a bandwidth problem. I mean, you have a major general with his headquarters out in Fort Knox, and he's essentially having to figure this out on his own. There is no big national effort. There's no big DOD effort. And the Army, frankly, they have a good-sized staff, but maybe there's a couple, 3 people that think about this on the Army staff. So it's really not something, I wish I could sound more optimistic about that, but we just haven't dedicated the effort, I don't think, necessary to kind of fix this problem. I think Congress, given the right set of justifications, presented with the right data about a pay raise or some other form of compensation, is very much willing to take this on. There has to be some data behind it. Maybe it's pay, maybe it's another, some sort of bonus. I don't know what. I think Congress is the least of our problems, frankly, in this, because they're typically if there's one bipartisan issue in Congress, it's supporting the military. And so they'd be willing to support this if the right case was made, I think. So, yes, sir, right there.
Hey, good morning. My name's Ted Hanger. I'm in Seminar 20. Since you said it, I do think Congress doesn't have it right for a couple reasons. One, I don't think we accurately and consistently define the problem. Two, I don't think we seek the appropriate ways to cooperate, or if you want to talk about co-opetition between the different components. So I'm a National Guard officer, and I can assure you that our Adjutant General is testifying in front of our state legislature on a regular basis and defining these things, but I don't think at times we accurately define it. So we'll highlight resources we throw at some of these problems, but I think we frame it in a way that it's a good news story, not that we have to apply all these resources just to get some of these soldiers to the fight.
Right. No, it's a great point. We are just so sub-optimized. And so your point, I mean, the National Guard is a completely different recruiting organization than the Army. They may sit next to each other. There is no connective tissue between the two. And, and there are some state Guard programs that are just killing it. So Minnesota comes to mind. I was talking to somebody, I forget who, and he said, hey, no, we have no problem attracting people to join the Minnesota Guard. And I was like, what's that about? Because everybody else is. And he was like, well, yeah, our governor, our legislature is very supportive. They do pile-on, add-on supportive programs to the compensation offered by the military. I was like, wow, why can't we do more of that, And so, yeah, sir, right there in the back.
I'm a retired teacher. The most effective recruiters for the military I have ever seen is the Michigan National Guard. They start recruiting my kids. I taught 8th grade. I had guardsmen bring in veterans to talk to my kids about the battles I was teaching about in the 8th grade, those kids went into the National Guard. He was a tunnel rat from Vietnam. He brought in a combat engineer who was at Cochin Reservoir, who actually cried in my class when he remembered his comrades. And my kids said, he really still loves those people. And I said, it's a bond. They're there all the way from 8th grade till they graduate. When they graduate, we honored the kids who were going into the military and the National Guard the same way we honored the kids who got scholarships from Harvard, Yale, Michigan, Michigan State. It didn't matter. They got the same honor. But most of them went into the Michigan National Guard.
Yep.
And the Guard said, we'll set it up. If you want, you can go into ROTC and we'll help pay more than ROTC to get you through it and get you through college. You're starting too late. You're making your goal too short. You're not going to win these kids the last 2 years of high school. It isn't going to happen. The National Guard is there in the 8th grade.
Yep. I wish that would happen more. I was talking to a guy, and he was working with a congressman in New Jersey, and the National Guard is actually pulling out of New Jersey because they can't sustain units in northern New Jersey, you know. And so, like, they had an artillery battery, or I want to say, or something like that. They couldn't recruit enough people to serve it, and so the National Guard Bureau probably rightfully is saying, okay, we're going to do away with that unit in northern New Jersey, and we're going to move it somewhere else where we can actually recruit people. And so that's the consequence is of the military, at least in the Guard, you know, is pulling back from some of these states where they can't even recruit anymore. So that's a problem. Yes, ma'am, right up in the front there.
Good afternoon, or good morning, I should say. Thank you so much for the talk. I have a quick question about some of the solutions that you presented in your discussion. You know, 75% or so of new recruits in the military have an almost immediate family member who have served. Mom, dad, brother, aunt, uncle, et cetera. We heard that earlier this week. And yet your solution that you offered, you know, while recognizing this kind of growing civil military gap that's leading to a declining propensity to serve with the rest of the country, was to double down on recruiting in areas where we're already getting a lot of recruits, the areas around Fort Hood and 29 Palms and, you know, all of the different places where we have large bases where we disproportionately recruit from. Is this not robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit?
No, your point is well taken. I don't think we should abandon those places where we're not getting, but if we're not meeting our goals, we have to meet our, you know, mission number one should be make the number and then go from there. And so don't abandon Vermont, just don't give up on it. But, you know, I remember talking to somebody that said, hey, you know, sir, if we wanted to, we could make the entire recruiting goal for the United States Army in Puerto Rico alone. Should we do that? And I was like, well, that's very attractive. I like, you know, I mean, I like the idea of meeting our goal without having to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, but no, we shouldn't give up on the rest of America. And so I think, I mean, your point's well taken. We should balance this. We can't give up on Vermont, but we're not selling right now in Vermont. We're not selling in Oregon. It's, you know, our product isn't selling. And if we were a business, you would not keep your retail stores in Vermont if they weren't buying your stuff there. And so, I mean, we just have to be realistic about these things, I think. I don't know, it's not a very good answer to your question. We do have to work on this gap, but on at the end of the day, the Army has to make its recruiting mission. I think that's where I'm at. Yes, sir, right there.
So, if I talk for more than 3 minutes, I need you to grab the microphone. I'm going to apologize in advance if I offend anybody, but a couple things you said I found disturbing. Number one, the fact that schools will not permit military to offer students this opportunity. I think we're keeping kids from understanding a very viable option for career opportunity and the opportunity to serve their country. The other thing you said was that 60% of our graduates, high school graduates, are going to college. I am a public school administrator. I can tell you from my experience, 60% of our high school graduates have no business going to college. My apologies to my Penn State colleagues sitting in the row in front of me. Right here. But what we have found is that, you know, in education, as teachers, we have spent, I've been in school for 54 years. Well, I guess I didn't go to school my years 1 through 5, so 49 years. That's all I know. So of course, when I'm teaching my kids, I'm saying, you know, you got to go to college. That's the way to success in life. And so schools do have a certain view that in order, you know, the only path to success is college. And I think that is such a disservice to our kids because there are other options. And I wanted to stand and talk about, I'm from the great state of Ohio, where for the most part, we still love the police, and that's right, OH. But we still love the police, and we still hold the military in the highest regard. We love the flag. There are so many things pulling at our kids to look down on our country, and it really bothers me that any school district would say the military is not welcome in our school district. I just find that deplorable. And again, that was somewhat shocking to me because of the area in which I live. I want to tell you about an initiative that we have, and I've shared this with the seminar Super 6. That's right, Super 6, right? That's right. We meet in Ohio. We've got legislation about business advisory councils and how do we do a better job of career exploration for our students and letting them know what opportunities are out there. And you know, one of the things we struggle with is kids graduate, they don't have soft skills, and many of them can't pass a drug test. They can't communicate other than by texting, which doesn't, you know, bode real well in the business world. But so we developed this idea called it's a 3E campaign, and you may have already heard about this. This is not something that I invented myself, although I will take credit for it if you'd like to give it to me. But the 3E campaign. What we do is we tell kids they have 3 options after high school to enroll in school, which is certainly a viable option for many. They can enlist in the military, or they can enter employment. And what we start doing is in the 8th grade, like my colleague up here said, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, it's too late. Our kids are getting to May 31st, and many of them have no idea what they're doing on June 1st. They know they're going to walk across the stage to get their diploma, but they have no idea what they're doing. So we've got this 3E campaign. We actually call it What's Your E? And we hang banners around middle schools, and we hang banners around high schools, and the kids say, what does that mean? What's your E? And the teachers all know, well, these are your options after school. You're going to enroll in college, you're going to enlist in the military, or you're going to become employed. So we're writing curriculum for the middle school, career exploration, where kids can explore. You know, one of the places we're getting killed is in industry and construction, the skilled trades. We have an age of men and women retiring from the skilled trades, and we're not able to replace them because kids don't have to go to college to get a job making $30, $40, $50, $60 an hour welding or doing these other jobs that we're cheating them out of by pushing them to college. But the 3E campaign has been very successful for us. Kids are asked to think about what their E is as freshmen and sophomores, and by the time they're juniors, they have to declare their E. And when they declare their E, it is celebrated. We've got closed circuit TVs in all of our districts and the 3 counties that I work in. where kids have chosen their E. They explain why. Their pictures are being broadcast around our 3-county region. And like the gentleman set up here, we celebrate those kids at graduation. We have signing days for kids that are signing employment contracts. We have signing days for kids that are signing their contract with the military, and we still celebrate those kids that are getting academic scholarships and are signing contracts to go to college. All of these kids deserve to be celebrated, but I'm telling you, there are kids out there that would be very successful. I've been very impressed, and I appreciate the opportunity that I was given to be here and to meet the men and women in my group. And again, I think it's detestable. I think that if you work through your state legislators who and those representatives in Congress, if they can talk to the county level superintendents, which is what I am, and we can maybe have some influence on the districts to get the recruiters in the schools. Again, I just think we're missing out on such an opportunity. I know there's not a question there, but I appreciated your comments. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. And I'll just add, I think that another thing we overlook is, the average life expectancy for Americans is I want to say 87 years. And so there is enough time for a young person to serve in the military honorably 4 or 5 years, get their entitlements to the GI Bill, then go to college, and then have 2 civilian careers if you want after that. I mean, there's no shortage there's no rush to get to college, and it doesn't get any better if you get there on the first day you're eligible, and there's all kinds of anecdotal evidence that kids that don't go immediately to go to college actually get more out of the college experience than they do if they get there right out of high school. Yes, sir, right in the back there.
Hi, sir. Colonel Graham White, Seminar 11. So this is a underdeveloped idea or thought here. Just wanted to share. Have we thought about, in order to plant the servant leadership seed early in a person's life, and sadly the need to protect, defend, secure, and keep the peace within our schools, linking that to JROTC? The idea being, and you mentioned like changing the name or potentially the uniform, but I would imagine there's a good number of high schoolers that take pride in their school. And, and I'm referring to the problem in America today, school shooters, et cetera. Linking those two things, students who have pride in their school and want to do those things, keep the peace, secure it, protect it, defend it. And that plants a seed for later in life, I think, the idea of servant leadership and doing the same things for our nation. Thanks.
Yep. I don't have an opinion on that. I don't know if y'all do. I worry a little bit about the training aspects and empowering somebody with some level of responsibility without the training and the means to back it up a little bit. It reminds me kind of, I don't know about if they're still a thing or not. I guess it's not. When I was a kid, I was a crossing guard. I had the little belt, and I thought I was the thing, and I don't think that's a thing anymore unless I'm wrong, because I never see kids doing that anymore. Okay, yes, sir, right there.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
Hey, good morning, sir. Thank you for your time this morning. We've really touched deep into half of Secretary Warmoth's 6th priority, which is the recruiting side. And I think there's a full picture that goes into recruiting. It's absolutely the recruiters and the things that they do. There's family members who have served and can speak to what their experiences were like. But then there's the recent veterans. So the other half of Secretary Warmoth's comment talks about retention. So has any of your research or writings gone into where are people getting out? Why are they not being retained? Is it the junior enlisted? Is it the middle level NCO? Is it the junior officer? And what is the impact of that on recruiting? So
Yeah.
where's that disconnect?
Retention is a little told good news story for the Army, essentially. There are some specialty fields where it's really hard to keep people in. Cyber, others where their skills directly apply to the commercial sector. But by and large, once people get in the Army, we don't have a problem keeping them unless they're being poached by some commercial entity. And so I don't think I mentioned this. So since 2018, the Army has not met its its recruiting goals, not since 2018. But they haven't talked about it. They will tell you at the end of the year, the Army has met its end strength goals. It's like, well, what does that mean? Well, what it means is even though they didn't recruit as many people as they wanted to, they made it up by keeping more people in the Army. And so they have used retention as kind of the balancing factor to make end strength. Now, you can do that for a while, but after a while, as an analytic person will tell you, you can't keep a bunch of sergeants and not have privates coming in. Your force becomes imbalanced and you become an older force than you need. You need this constant influx of young people coming in at the bottom of your grade pyramid. And so that solution only works for a little while, but to its retention has not been a big problem, and they have used it as kind of a shock absorber to meet the Army's end strength requirements.
Sir, somebody spent a lot of time in front of audiences. It's always a sign of success when you reach the end and there's still a lot of interest out there. So I saw about half a dozen hands previously. So I think you've absolutely hit the bullseye today. You've helped us think through a really important problem that the Army and the nation is facing. And I know myself, I really look forward to seminar discussion afterward to continue to explore some of these issues. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.